I'm gonna take this home.
Yeah, you can do. Go for it. It's a gift.
No.
Thank you very much. That was super interesting. I'm sure there's going to be a few questions from the audience. The first thing that I picked up on was, you touched upon essentially the whole thing around nobody listening to experts anymore. Not saying that Greta Thunberg isn't necessarily an expert or has made herself an expert in some way, but isn't, like you say, the sort of godfather of climate change, for example. Do you think that's a sign of the times, or do you think that's just the way things are now?
Both. I think both. The problem is that we have too many experts too, right? We have so many experts, that many, that it's very difficult even to decide which one to listen to. And the problem also is that when you have that many experts, you also have very few philosophers or cultural critics that sort of see the bigger picture that the experts are missing, right? One point about the expert. So I'm sure you notice that sometimes you go to your doctor, or physician, whatever, right? And you tell him, you know what? Also, I also have some back pain. So no. I'm a dermatologist. I only deal with your skin, right? So doctors now have become so specialized, right, that you have to go and see 20 before you see. But before it wasn't like that, right? And before, and not that they're better doctors now, not at all. That before, right, the doctors were educated, they were formed to respond to your whole body, right? To tell you, what, you have depression, you need to go and see a shrink. Now it's very difficult to find that because the way we are forming doctors, everybody specialized in one single thing, right? And this is something that I think, this is one of the reasons also that we don't listen to one, is because we have so many experts, everybody's so specialized that nobody's going to tell you, you just have to see a psychiatrist, it's your mom's fault or whatever, right? I think that's one of the problems.
I guess, you spoke about the warning sign in Barceloneta by the artists as well of the kind of rising tides and things. I guess touching on what you said before as well, is that a similar situation to what we see on Instagram at the moment now? Everyone can find an expert in whatever they like, even though they don't necessarily have any qualifications in that particular area, and that ties into that's another philosophical question. Maybe are Instagram influencers artists in some way?
So you mean that there are too many experts?
Exactly.
Everybody's an expert.
Yes.
Right. So everybody's an expert, and we, since we don't listen, we just take everything for granted in some way. So that's the problem of access we have to knowledge, right? The access we have to knowledge, the fact that it's very easy to get access to that knowledge, it's actually a problem. It is not a good thing because, who am I going to listen to? So, the first one that comes on Instagram. Just the most important professor they have at university. Wait a second. The thing is that we have so much of that. We have so many experts, right? We have so many people that apparently have the authority, right? Because this is a question of authority. Who has the authority? And this is a tricky question because who has the authority depends. If I have the authority, for example, let's imagine that I am a good, serious philosopher and I'm a good philosopher and I should be listened to.
Which you are.
No, but who gives me the authority? Do I give it myself? You have to listen to me, or you give me the authority because I'm a good philosopher? It's others that give you the authority, right? If you look at Trump, it's precisely the other way around, right? He thinks he has the authority, and you have to. So the problem here is that now, before I talked about interpretation and hermeneutics, and so we have true existence. If we think that we are free and everything, that means that we also have a responsibility to get the right knowledge. In other words, we have a serious responsibility when we go online, not to end up believing any blogger who is in who knows where, right? We have the responsibility to choose carefully what we're going to read. And if you look at what it was 50 years ago, when we had printed papers, it was better off back then. I mean, papers lied then too, just like they lie now. The only thing is that there were not that many, right? So your possibilities of getting it wrong were fewer than they were now, right? It's curious that now, for example, I know I talk more during the questions but one more thing.
Carry on.
Yeah, but no. But for example, Edward Snowden that we mentioned, Julian Assange and all that. Okay. So Julian Assange had all that information much before it all came out. It is only once he made a deal with The Guardian, New York Times, and El País, I think, that it became information that you could seriously rely on. In other words, it has to be vetted by someone, right? Before, when he had it on his own, it didn't really work. I mean, it was out there, but it didn't really work. It had to be, the establishment in some way, right? That gave him credit for it. Otherwise, it doesn't work, right?
Sorry, my phone started ringing and distracting me then.
Okay.
I think just carrying on a social media tilt for a second as well. Do you think you said everything you mentioned just then? Do you think the way the algorithms work and the way that everywhere does seem now to be full of experts, do you think the age of discovery in some way is over because we're constantly fed what the algorithm thinks we want to see? Therefore, we're even more blind than perhaps we were before.
Right. I like this question. So my new book is titled "The Horizonless Society." Which what does that mean? It means that our society doesn't have horizons anymore, right? So it's not simply that we don't have housing crisis and there is no future for anyone. It's not simply that. It's simply that in this society, it's very difficult to imagine a future, like I mentioned before. An alternative, even more difficult, right? But it is very difficult. In other words, we don't have the possibility. For example, if you look at someone like Trump, who really doesn't have any sort of horizon whatsoever, even his English is reduced to, New York Times did a thing last year, I think 1,000 words, or even, no, 500 words. But anyway, so what is someone without a horizon? Someone without a horizon, for example, maybe someone who never left Barcelona and always lives here. Well, if you do travel a little bit, well, you will probably start to value also things that are not near you. In other words, if you don't have any horizon, you would only value what is in front of you. Right? So that's the problem. The problem here is that those algorithms and all that stuff there, all artificial intelligence, it's really a knowledge that is very horizontal. I mean, we're not going too far there. There's a coming. In other words, even if you think about scientists, and I know you have a lot of scientists that come here. So if you ask them, their work has to get funded, right? Otherwise, I can go on without funding. Philosophy is cheap, but they can't go on without funding. Yeah, but they're in serious trouble because if their research is not sexy enough, they won't get funded. Okay, and the amount of scientists working on very serious illness, which are not as sexy as things for diet or stuff like that, they don't get enough funding. So this means that there's also, it is more constrained than what it was before. So here's a problem that, algorithm, all that's a big problem, but I don't think it's the only problem. I think it's one of the problems that it's one of those great emergencies, perhaps, that we should be confronting.
Just to touch on my last question, just to touch on some of your other work as well. You spoke about being at large.
Yep.
And how it's basically impossible to get lost these days, which I think is pretty accurate. Do you think you mentioned your parents traveling in the 70s and things as well. Do you think we're safer then, or we're safer now? And I don't mean physically in terms of being tracked and things, but in a more broad perspective of safety.
Well, if ICE is looking for you in New York, you're not safe at all. So, safe. Yeah, let's put it this way. So, again, who is freer? Us here in the West or in China? So let's reduce that question to, let's say, social media, right? So immediately you think, oh, here we can go all the time. Yeah, we should, because they have the same social media we have. They call it different. There's one particular difference which is very interesting, is that our social media here belongs to some dude in California that probably doesn't speak Spanish, French for sure, German, and doesn't literally even pay taxes here as far as the European Union is concerned. In China, that same social media belongs to the state. I mean, they're going to screw you. Both of them are going to screw you. Okay, there's no difference there. The only thing is that the difference between how they screw you is that at least one belongs to, maybe first you might have a cousin working there because it belongs to the state, and second of all, well, it's reduced to controlling you the same way, but at least it belongs to you in some way. Here, it doesn't even belong to us. Okay, so I am not so sure who is freer from that point of view. In other words, who is safer? I am not so sure, because also the fact that, if you look at, for example, the way China addresses this global conflict, right? They stand out, and I think they should be more involved. I think, but anyway, they are able to stand out. I'm not so sure whether that's making us. I think, if going back to the 1970s, in the 1970s they still had the Soviet Union, right? So they had two big blocks, right? The West and Soviet Union. And if you read social political scientists, they explain that the difference is that back then, United States and the Soviet Union, they both had to be a little bit more careful than what now the United States is not careful at all. I mean, it's obviously, right? Before, they had a reality check there. You can't do that because I'm going to do something to you. We had two blocks, right? At least, right? Not that it was much more peaceful, but it was a little bit better. Now we don't have two blocks. Now we have one block, right? And we see what they're capable of. So I am not so sure we are safer now. At least, well, if we look at the employment and all that stuff, we're definitely not safer now.